Hi, Alan Adler here for episode 3 of the Sustainable Community Life podcast. This conversation is an interesting one because I'm going to go deep into the connection between economics and social sustainability and talk a lot about how ecovillages and intentional communities really create some magic by creating means with meaning, by pairing the social factors and the economic factors. I want to apologize for the fact that the rest of this podcast will be audio only with some video added. My video feed and my audio feed got messed up, but I liked the audio so much that I wanted to bring it to you. So I hope you enjoy these mostly audio podcasts. Every conversation I have with an intentional community, the topic of economic sustainability comes up all the time. And even though I believe that there are some really important sustainability factors around economic sustainability that intentional communities uniquely allow for, there's such a predominance of money centricity in our culture, and money seems to be the intermediary that everyone is focused on. Even in intentional communities, how the economics works is really challenging. But it's important to observe that there are some really exciting pluses to thinking about economic sustainability inside of an intentional community that I think with the right engagement, and I'm excited about bringing my industry orientation from the profit world into the intentional community world. With the right engagement and the right strategies and methods and focus and plans, there's really a possibility, I believe, for creating a very robust economic sustainability inside and across intentional communities. And this podcast is going to be the first of many discussions around what to think about economic sustainability in relationship to both conventional and intentional communities, and how intentional communities might be able to step up their game with respect to thinking about how to create economic sustainability. So let's start out with an orientation on why it is that intentional communities are so different from sustainable communities with respect to economic and social sustainability. So I've had 2 podcasts already, the first introducing 2 of the 4 layers of sustainability being social and economic, and then podcast number 2 where I went into this model that depicted how to think about sustainability in each of these areas, the layers and the attributes associated with how to think about the drivers of sustainability within and across the layers. This podcast is all about the fascinating interlock or lack thereof between social and economic sustainability. So let's just take a typical scenario for understanding the interlock from an intentional community perspective and a conventional community perspective. So in an intentional community, there is a very strong interlock between the social and the economic because at their core, sustainable communities do not reduce a person to a resource and assign a monetary value to them, but rather treats every human being as sacred and a contributing member of the community, and doesn't value them based on how much is their labor worth, but rather that their labor is a part of their contribution. And so there's this way that sustainable communities create an equality foundation that is not common in conventional communities. So we know that in conventional communities, rich people live with rich people, poor people live with poor people. And if they do interact, it's because the poorer people are coming to serve the richer people. I know that's a rather stark observation, but we can see just in the way that at least the U.S. and the Western countries operate, everything comes down to how much does something cost? How much does a house cost? Who are your neighbors? And what do you got to have from a convenience, comfort perspective in order to keep the unconscious light bulbs on? The thing that's sustainable about intentional communities, which I think is really exciting, is that by virtue of thinking about the social factors and the economic factors in a pairing, there's a much higher likelihood that money is not going to get in the way of how we want to operate and iterate in our social lives and in our economic lives. Let's take an example of that. So most intentional communities, particularly if they're ecovillages, have some form of permacultural or agricultural foundation where the individuals in the community grow their own food. And they also have some aspect of sharing with respect to the preparing of that food. So you see people sharing their food, you see people sharing cooking. So if we think about that from the perspective of the economics and the social dynamics, we can see that my labor goes into the preparation of the food. My labor goes into the preparation of the cooking, the cleaning, and even in the building of the place where we meet together to share our meals. And that is not happening either by dividing the social or the economic or by putting money in the middle. Now, of course, some intentional communities do hire tradesmen to come in and do stuff. And sometimes we use money to hire somebody inside our community to help us with something. But the bottom line is that the social economic connection essentially results in means and meaning being locked. Means comes from having the resources, and the meaning comes from the labor that produces the means. So that interlock is really powerful. And one of the reasons I think we have the potential for social and economic sustainability. And of course, in a conventional community, that doesn't exist, right? In a conventional community, I have my social life and my family life, my neighborhood life, but almost none, or very rarely, I should say, is any of the creation of the means, the house, the electricity, the food, etc., coming from the labor of the neighborhood. It's coming from me going somewhere else, doing a job, getting money, using the money to buy things, and so forth. This I believe to be a big reason why there is such lack of meaning in the connection between the social and the economic, why they're not sustainable in a conventional environment, even though people would say, oh, that works fine. When you really look at it, the levels of dissatisfaction, the levels of stress, the levels of anxiety, purposelessness are so high as a function of these disconnected layers. However, and I think this is really important to observe, intentional communities are not necessarily economically self-sufficient or economically sustainable. And there are several reasons for this, in my view, but I'm looking forward to diving into this with more of my personal research as I go to visit the communities. But if you remember from episode number 2, one of the most important attributes of sustainability were things like diversity and growth mindset, ecosystematic orientation, and redundancy. There were a few others, but those are the ones that are important. Unfortunately, in many ecovillages and intentional communities, their very nature isolates them from other environments that create greater levels of diversity. If we take, for example, a really successful ecovillage like Dancing Rabbit, which is located in southern Missouri, they're far away from everything. And so the access to a diverse set of inputs and outputs makes it challenging for them versus, say, an ecovillage like Ithaca Co-Housing, which is located 2 miles away from downtown Ithaca. This is not to suggest that ecovillages should be located near big cities, but is to say that the further we are away from population density, the more difficult it becomes to drive that diversity component. It also becomes difficult to drive the redundancy component. Remember, the two attributes, the first and the last, were diversity and redundancy. Redundancy is easy when you have high population density. In other words, if you live in a city and your dentist leaves, there's going to be another dentist. But if you're far away from dentistry and your dentist is gone, you're in trouble. This is one of the reasons why it's so important when we think about creating economic self-sufficiency or economic sustainability in an eco-village, to be thinking about access to other environments that can be married and blended with the intentional community in order to create that sense of input-output or diversity and redundancy capability in the system. And this is an area where I think there's tremendous opportunity for growth and enhancement of economic sustainability. So within the Eco-Village Network, or intentional communities for that matter, there are a number of organizations like the Global Eco-Village Network that act as a sort of ecosystem of the eco-villages. They provide a lot of value. However, the economic system that supports each of these intentional communities is pretty much an on-your-own sort of thing. And by that I mean, just in the same way that it's very isolating to be an individual inside of a big city, it's, I think, somewhat isolating to be a community inside of a non-intentional economy and a non-intentional ecosystem. So one of the things that I'm really excited about doing over the next few years is building an ecosystematic layer of support for intentional communities so that the same model of the exchange of social and economic harmonies and interlocks can be created on a multi-eco-village or multi-intentional community level. And there can be a variety of nested ecosystems on a local, regional, national, and global basis to facilitate this sort of ecosystem-based approach to economic sustainability. One additional idea that I want to float that's also associated with the attributes is the notion that growth mindset, which is typically associated with capitalism and profit-based organizations, is really a terrific value to intentional communities. Because although we all love the idea of staying small and staying intimate, growth provides layers of potential expansion. First, growth brings additional resources in the form of monetary returns. If we, for example, set up a cottage industry, we're going to start seeing the inflows of dollars. And even though we want to be moving away from money as much as possible by virtue of how it separates us, the reality is that we have to be hybrid for a while, operating in an economic system in which there's exchange and an economic system in which there's money. And so growing entrepreneurial and new ventures is an amazing way to bring money into the system. One of the reasons why I mentioned earlier that this ecosystematic aspect is so important is because the more those cottage industries and the more those growth mindsets can be paired on an ecosystematic level, not just within the context of just one eco-village, but also multiple eco-villages, the better off we're going to be. So that's it for now. I hope this was a useful podcast. I'm really excited about this topic, and I'm looking forward to diving deep into it because I believe that if eco-villages can achieve self-sustaining economic vibrance and robustness, that we can see a growth in the eco-villages and we can see a dynamic taking place that changes things.